My father fired me on a Tuesday morning, in the same conference room where I once ate birthday cake as a kid, surrounded by the same oil paintings of dead partners staring down at me. I was 26 years old, an associate at Bennett and Whitlock, the firm my great-grandfather started, and my father Richard Bennett did not even wait for the door to close before he said it. "This is a restructuring decision, Claire, nothing personal." He signed the termination letter before I sat down, like my chair was already someone else's. The official reason on the paperwork said performance-related separation, at-will employment, no severance owed, personnel file sealed pending exit review. The real reason sat 2 floors down in a filing cabinet. 3 weeks earlier a partner had asked me to reconcile a client's invoices before quarter end, and I had sat at my desk at 9 at night running the numbers twice because the first pass did not balance, hours logged in the system that did not match hours billed to the client, off by amounts too clean to be a typo. I printed the discrepancy, highlighted it in yellow, and left it on my chair the next morning like it might disappear if I looked away from it. Nobody in that conference room mentioned the billing records. Nobody had to. My father slid a cardboard box across the table like he had ordered it in advance, and maybe he had. My Aunt Patricia, who ran HR, stood by the door with her arms crossed, not looking at me once. My sister Vivian, already a junior partner at 29, checked her phone the entire time. Only one person in that building looked me in the eye that day, and she did not even work there anymore. My grandmother Eleanor Bennett had retired from the front desk 2 years earlier after 35 years answering phones and filing motions for a family that barely said thank you. She was in the lobby when I walked out with my box, waiting by the elevators like she knew, and she pulled me into a hug that smelled like coffee and peppermint and said one sentence I would carry for the next 7 years. "Whatever they told you in there, I believe you." My father watched us from the glass office upstairs. He did not come down. As the elevator doors closed, I heard him say to Patricia, loud enough to carry, "She is just an associate, she will find something else." I did not know yet how wrong that sentence would turn out to be. I filed a formal complaint with HR before I even left the building that week because that is what you are supposed to do. That is what every ethics seminar in law school tells you to do. I sat across from my Aunt Patricia in her office with the door shut and told her exactly what I found. Invoices billed to a manufacturing client that did not match the actual hours logged in the system. Numbers that had been quietly adjusted after the fact. Patricia listened with her hands folded, nodding in the way people nod when they have already decided not to hear you. "This sounds like a misunderstanding, Claire. Billing corrections happen all the time." I asked her to at least look at the spreadsheet I had printed out. She slid it back across the desk without opening it. "I think you are still upset about the termination, and that is understandable, but let us not turn this into something bigger than it is." 2 days later I got a call from a firm across town, a place I had interviewed with in the spring, offering me a second-round interview. I was in my car outside a coffee shop, badge from Bennett and Whitlock still clipped to my bag out of habit, and for the first time in a week I let myself feel something close to hope. That hope lasted about 18 hours. The recruiter called back the next afternoon, her voice suddenly formal, explaining that the position had been filled internally. "Thank you so much for your interest." I called a second firm I had reached out to. Same story, different words, "The role is on hold for now." I did not think much of it until my old paralegal texted me from a number I did not recognize, telling me my father had personally called both firms after hearing I had interviews lined up. I sat in my apartment that night with my laptop open to a blank job application, LinkedIn notifications piling up with messages I stopped answering, and I felt something shift in my chest that was not quite anger yet, more like disbelief settling into a shape I would have to live with. My phone buzzed once more before midnight. It was my grandmother, no text, just a photo of a manila folder sitting on her kitchen table, and underneath it 3 words. "Keep this safe." I drove to her house the next morning before work at the temp agency I had just signed up with. She handed me the folder at her front door without much explanation, just a look that told me not to ask yet. "Some things are better understood later, Gracie," she said, using the old nickname she had not used since I was a teenager. I put the folder in my car and did not open it for almost a year. I took a compliance job at a small regulatory agency downtown, the kind of role my father would have called a step down at every family dinner if I still went to family dinners. The pay was a third of what I made at the firm. The office was a shared floor with 3 other agencies, and I told myself it was temporary, a place to breathe while I figured out what came next. Some nights I sat with Eleanor's folder still sealed in a filing box in my closet and thought seriously about mailing it back to her unopened, telling her I did not want to be the person who carried this, that it would be easier to let it stay buried with everything else my family had decided not to talk about. 6 months in, I ran into Vivian at a State Bar Association mixer I had been talked into attending by a coworker. She was in a group of associates from bigger firms, holding a glass of wine like a prop, and when she saw me she did not lower her voice at all. "Claire is doing compliance work now," she said to the group like she was reading a headline. "Some people just could not cut it in litigation, and that is fine, not everyone is built for the pressure." I said nothing, because I had learned by then that anything I said in a room full of my family's colleagues got repeated back to my father within the hour. I finished my drink and left early, and in the parking garage I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could make myself turn the key. That was the same week my grandmother's neighbor called to tell me Eleanor had been taken to the hospital after a fall. I drove straight there, badge from the agency still on my blazer, and found my father in the waiting room for the first time in almost 2 years. He looked older than I remembered, gray creeping into his temples, a legal pad balanced on his knee instead of a hand to hold. "Claire," he said, standing up too quickly, "we need to talk about something before you go in and see her." He handed me a document, not a get-well card, not a question about how I was holding up, an actual document, a non-disclosure agreement with my name already typed at the top. "This is just a formality," he said, "for the family's protection, regarding anything you may have seen at the firm before you left." When I did not reach for the pen, he added, quieter, "My father built that firm out of nothing after his own father lost his license. Claire, I am not going to be the generation that loses it again. You of all people should understand what it costs to hold something together." I looked at him standing in a hospital waiting room asking me to sign away my voice, and for the first time I understood he actually believed that was the reasonable thing to ask. "I am not signing anything," I said, and I walked past him into my grandmother's room. She was pale against the white sheets, but her eyes were sharp when they found mine, and she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Did he bring papers?" I nodded. She almost laughed. "Of course he did," she said, "that is the only language he speaks anymore." Outside in the hallway I could hear my father on his phone, his voice low and clipped, already managing something, already 3 steps ahead of whatever he thought I might do next. The night before all of this started, back when I still had my old office at Bennett and Whitlock, I had pulled the file on that manufacturing client because a partner asked me to double-check a routine invoice. The company was called Haverton Industrial, a mid-size manufacturer out of Ohio, and buried in the account notes was a line I almost skipped past, a reference to a federal supply contract the company held with the Department of Defense. At the time it meant nothing to me, just a detail in a spreadsheet, the kind of thing you note and move past when you are 26 and trying to finish billing before 6 o'clock. I remember thinking only that federal contracts usually meant extra paperwork, extra oversight, and I made a mental note to be careful with the numbers before I ever suspected anyone had already been careless with them on purpose. 7 years passed the way years do when you stop counting them. One job becoming a career, the compliance role turning into a position with the U.S. Attorney's Office handling corporate fraud cases. I had a badge that said something different now, a title that made people in meetings stop interrupting me. I had not spoken to my father since the hospital hallway. I still had not opened Eleanor's folder, tucked away in a filing box in my closet, mostly forgotten. Then a case landed on my desk on a Thursday afternoon. A whistleblower complaint involving a law firm accused of falsifying billing records tied to a defense contractor named Haverton Industrial. I read the name twice before it registered. Before the old memory surfaced of a spreadsheet I had flagged when I was 26 years old in an office that no longer had my name on the directory. I pulled the case file properly for the first time and felt my stomach drop somewhere around the 3rd page. The law firm named in the complaint was Bennett and Whitlock. My hands were steady when I closed the folder. My pulse was not. There was no version of this where I could quietly hand the case to someone else without a supervisor eventually asking why I had passed on it. I requested the assignment formally instead because if I stepped back now, someone else would run this case without knowing what I knew, without understanding what that folder in my closet might actually contain. 3 days later I walked into a pretrial conference room at the federal courthouse, laptop bag over my shoulder, government badge clipped to my blazer, and stopped just inside the doorway. My father was seated at the defense table. Beside him my Aunt Patricia, now the firm's general counsel. Beside her Vivian, a named partner these days. Her expression rearranged itself into something professional a half-second too late. My father looked up first. His face did something I had never seen it do in 26 years. It went blank, then afraid. He opened his mouth to speak. "Claire," he said, half standing, and then stopped himself, glancing at opposing counsel's chair like he was double-checking it belonged to me. It did. I set my bag down and did not offer him my hand. The judge entered a moment later and the room reorganized itself into formality. Everyone finding their seats, everyone pretending the last 30 seconds had not happened. My father tried it anyway, once the preliminary matters were underway, leaning toward his own counsel table and speaking just loud enough to be heard on the record. "With respect, Your Honor, opposing counsel has a personal history with the defendants that raises questions about her objectivity, given that she is a disgruntled former employee of this firm." I recognized the phrase immediately. It was almost the exact language Patricia had used in that HR office 7 years earlier, dusted off and repurposed as a legal strategy. The judge asked me directly to state my role, and any relevant history for the record. I stood, and for the first time in years I said it plainly, without softening it for anyone in that room. I worked as an associate at Bennett and Whitlock for 11 months before my termination. During that time, I flagged irregular billing on the Haverton Industrial account to Human Resources. That complaint was dismissed as a misunderstanding. The documentation from that original review has remained in my possession since that time. I watched my aunt's pen stop moving. I watched Vivian's eyes flick toward our father, waiting for him to fix this the way he had always fixed things. He did not move at all. The judge looked between the tables for a long moment, then said the case would need a short recess before proceeding, given what had just been placed on the record, and asked both sides to be prepared to discuss the origin and chain of custody of any relevant documentation when court resumed. My father found me in the hallway during the recess, the same hallway tactic he had used in a hospital 7 years earlier, and for a moment I almost expected him to pull out another document with my name already typed at the top. Instead he just stood there, looking smaller than I remembered him being in that conference room the day he fired me. "Claire, whatever you have, we can handle this as a family before it goes any further." "I am not your associate anymore, Dad," I said, "and I am not signing anything this time either. I called my office that evening 7 years ago. I told her exactly what happened, but I do not think either of us understood then how long she would end up holding on to it for me." His face changed slightly, some calculation running behind his eyes, and I realized in that moment he still did not know what I was talking about. When court resumed, I submitted Eleanor's folder into the record, copies of the original billing spreadsheet, dated and initialed the week I first flagged it, along with a handwritten note in the margin that read, "In case they ever try to say this did not happen." My grandmother, sitting in a front desk chair for 35 years, had apparently learned exactly how firms like ours tried to make inconvenient paperwork disappear, and had made sure this particular piece never could. Opposing counsel for the defense objected immediately, arguing 7-year-old personal copies proved nothing on their own without corroboration. The judge agreed enough to require a forensic accountant to verify the numbers against Haverton's own current records before ruling on admissibility, which meant nothing was settled yet, only that the door I thought had just opened stayed open one hearing longer. It took 11 days and a subpoenaed set of current invoices to confirm what Eleanor's folder had already been saying since I was 26. That the pattern from 7 years ago had simply continued, quietly, the whole time. When the accountant's report came back, my aunt sat frozen at the defense table. Vivian put her head down against her folded hands for a long moment before straightening back up, already understanding what this meant for a law license she had spent a decade building. My father did not say anything else for the rest of the hearing. He just sat there very still while the judge ordered the documents formally entered into evidence. The settlement came through 2 months later, and I only found out how it looked from the outside because a colleague forwarded me a legal trade publication with a photo of the Bennett and Whitlock lobby, the brass letters on the wall already half unscrewed for a rebrand nobody had announced yet. The firm agreed to pay penalties and submit to independent audits for 5 years. My father was referred to the state bar for the original mishandled complaint. Then, a week after that, a second name showed up in the filing I had not expected. A former associate 2 years behind me who had apparently reported the same client account in a different form and been quietly let go the same way I had, which meant Haverton was not the only file with my old handwriting in the margins of someone else's exit paperwork. Vivian resigned from the partnership before any formal proceedings against her could begin, choosing to leave quietly rather than face a hearing with her name attached to it. I drove out to see my grandmother the week the settlement became public, and found her in her garden, moving slower than she used to but still stubbornly out there with her gloves and her trowel. She did not ask how the case had gone. She already knew because I had called her the night before it happened, my voice shaking in a way it had not shaken in years, telling her I finally understood what that folder had been for. She just smiled and kept working at the soil, and after a while she said, "I did not keep it because I thought you would need it someday. I kept it because I already knew what kind of family raised your father, and I was not about to let them do the same thing to you and call it nothing." I sat down on the bench beside her, and for a long time neither of us said anything else, which felt like exactly the right amount of conversation for what we had both just lived through. I did not go back to Bennett and Whitlock, not even to pack up whatever was left in storage. There was nothing there I still wanted. My father sent one email a few weeks later, a single line with no subject, telling me the firm would be formally rebranding under new leadership by spring. I read it twice and did not respond. I deleted his contact card that same night, not out of anger, just because I finally had no reason left to keep it. I stayed with the U.S. Attorney's Office after the case closed, and within a year I was overseeing a small team focused on corporate whistleblower complaints, the exact kind of case that once cost me a job and a family and very nearly 7 years of my career. I started an internal mentorship program for young attorneys who came forward with concerns and were not believed the first time, and without telling anyone why, I named it the Bennett Whitfield Fellowship, borrowing my grandmother's maiden name for the second half. Sometimes new hires ask me why I care so much about first-year associates who report things nobody wants to hear. I usually just tell them a short version, that someone once believed me when it cost her nothing to look away instead, and that I try to be that person now for people who do not have one yet. My father was not just an associate who could be replaced. Neither was I. It just took the right courtroom 7 years later, for both of us to finally understand that. If someone in your life ever kept a folder like mine quietly for years without ever telling you why, tell me about them in the comments. I want to know who your Eleanor was.